Alright, so the article I decided to go over was Eating Christmas in the Kalahari. So a quick little summary is that the main idea is about the cultural misunderstandings that can occur when people interpret each other's actions through their own values. So Lee is a social anthropologist that buys a large ox to share with the Kung people for Christmas and expects gratitude. But instead of gratitude, Lee is met with the Kung people mocking the ox as skinny and worthless. Later, Lee learns that this is a cultural practice that is meant to humble individuals and discourage arrogance to ensure equality in the group. And the story highlights the differences in cultural values, especially around generosity, humility, and social harmony. So the article illustrates the impact of worldview and the interpretation of cultural meanings in many different ways. Lee's article illustrates how worldview shapes the interpretation of cultural meanings by showing the same act, giving a large ox as a gift. This act or act similar is understood in very different ways. So in Lee's Western worldview, doing something like this, like gift giving, is often shows generosity, which is tied to recognition, praise, and gratitude. So Lee expected the Kung people to celebrate his big gift, but in the Kung people's worldview, boasting is seen as a threat and threatens the group's equality. The Kung people's cultural practice is insulting the meat to keep people humble and keep people from boasting or bragging to maintain a social balance. And some ethnocentric bias within the article is that Lee shows his ethnocentric bias in the article through the way he initially interprets the Kung people's reactions. Coming from a Western worldview, Lee assumes that his generosity will be met with gratitude, and gift giving is a way to earn respect and recognition. Lee feels hurt and humiliated when the Kung people insult his gift and he questions if the gift he gave failed. This response reflects the ethnocentric lens as he evaluates their behavior against his own cultural standard of appreciation and reciprocity. He realizes that the Kung people's worldview, mocking the meat, is not rejection, but a cultural practice to reinforce humility, discourage arrogance, and preserve egalitarian values. His early misunderstandings demonstrate how ethnocentrism can distort anthropological observation by imposing one's own cultural expectations on another society. Lee acknowledges his bias and learns that interpreting cultural practices requires setting aside his own worldview to see the same meaning as the Kung people. So, how the story challenges the notion that one's cultural values are normal or best is that the story shows how Lee's assumptions are about generosity and gratitude clash with the Kung people's values of humility and quality. From Lee's perspective, it seemed right that his gift would earn him respect, but to the Kung people consider this kind of recognition to be dangerous since it could lead to pride and disruption in social harmony. Their practice shows that what he thought was rude was a necessary way of maintaining balance in their culture. This shows that not a single cultural system is universal. So some specific or unique norms in my culture is that in my culture, slurping is seen as an approval, or slurping food is seen as an approval. Slurping in my culture shows that that you think the food is good and you enjoy it, and slurping from outsiders, slurping can be seen as rude or sometimes even disgusting. But to my culture, slurping is seen as enjoying the food. So the best practice for communication across cultures is approach interactions with different cultures and with cultural humility by suspending your judgment and asking questions and seek to understand the meaning from the perspective of the other culture. Lee initially interprets the Kung people's insults as rude because he applied his own cultural values or his own cultural lens. Once he learns that this practice is meant to discourage arrogance and preserve equality, he realizes that this behavior has a positive social function. Lee approaches the interaction with more cultural humility by asking why they spoke that way and observing without judgment. He could have avoided misunderstanding and gained insight sooner. So, some personal experience with cultural misunderstanding is that in my culture, with slurping food, it is seen as enjoyment. So, a lot of the time I was with my grandparents and they came from Vietnam. So, I was always around slurping food, and that always meant that it was good. But whenever I ate at home and I slurped my food, to me it showed that it was good. But to my mom, she kind of saw it as like disgusting, and she would tell me to stop. But my dad was always kind of supportive of it, and because he grew up in the same culture as me. So some significant lessons and ideas that I learned in this article is that try not to have an ethnocentric bias, so you can learn more about different cultures, and what seems not normal to you can seem perfectly fine with someone else from a different culture.